On Monday, they brought bulldozers to erase my so-called abandoned warehouse while the whole family watched. I did not cry or argue. I simply smiled. My uncle had no idea that beneath the rusting tin sheets lay a secret so volatile that a single phone call to a city inspector would not just stop his demolition, but crumble his entire real estate empire into dust. My name is Aurora Mitchell, and for the last 3 years, my family has been convinced I am destitute. They look at my clothes, which are practical rather than designer. They look at my car, which is reliable rather than flashy, but mostly, they look at the 5,000-square-foot corrugated metal box sitting on the western edge of their precious commercial empire and see nothing but failure. To the Holloway family, silence is synonymous with death. If you are not making noise, if you are not flashing neon signs, if you are not parading clients through the front door in Italian suits, you do not exist. The irony, of course, is that silence is the most expensive commodity in the world. And on that Friday afternoon, sitting in the mahogany-paneled boardroom of the Holloway block headquarters, I was the only one who could afford it. Uncle Gavin did not like silence. He liked the sound of his own voice and the thud of heavy objects hitting solid surfaces. He slammed the architectural blueprints onto the conference table with enough force to make the crystal water pitchers jump. The noise echoed off the walls, a sharp crack that was meant to induce flinching. My cousins, Dylan and Renee, sat on either side of the table and adjusted their posture, leaning in like eager vultures. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I just watched a dust mote drift through the beam of sunlight cutting across the room, landing gently on the plans that were laid out to destroy my life. "Monday," Gavin announced. His voice was a gravelly baritone that he had spent 40 years cultivating to intimidate contractors and tenants alike. He pointed a thick, manicured finger at the corner of the blueprint where a red X had been aggressively marker-penned over a square shape. "Monday morning, 8 o'clock, the crew arrives, the dozers arrive, and that rusting boil on the face of this family is gone." He looked at me then. He expected tears. He expected a plea for mercy. He expected the desperate begging of a niece who had been clinging to a dead asset for sentimental reasons. "It is a rusting boil. Aurora," he continued, his tone shifting from command to a mock-sympathetic sneer. "It is a health hazard. It is an eyesore. Do you know what the prospective tenants for the new retail strip said when they toured the lot last week? They asked if we were running a scrapyard next door." A scrapyard. Renee, sitting to my left, clicked her tongue. She was the family's real estate shark, a woman who measured human worth in price per square foot. "It is honestly embarrassing, Aurora," she said, smoothing the lapel of her blazer. "We have tried to be patient with you. We really have. Grandma left you that parcel because she pitied you, not because she wanted you to drag down the property value of the entire block. 3 years, and not a single billboard. Not a single truck in or out. The windows are taped over. The paint is peeling. It is blight, pure and simple." Dylan, the family accountant who always looked like he was sweating through his shirt, nodded in agreement, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. "The parking revenue alone," he mumbled, tapping his tablet. "If we pave that lot, we are talking about 40 additional spaces. In downtown Ridgeport, that is a significant monthly injection. We are losing money every single day that empty shell sits there." They had rehearsed this. I could see it in the way they passed the baton of conversation, layering guilt upon shame upon financial logic. They had built a narrative where I was the stubborn, failed artist or the recluse, hoarding a piece of prime real estate just to spite them. They believed the warehouse was empty because they never saw anyone go in. They believed it was abandoned because the lights were never on. They were so loud in their arrogance that they never stopped to ask why the electric bill was always paid on time, or why the perimeter fence, despite looking old, never had a single break in the chain link. "It is not just about the money," Gavin said, leaning forward, placing his hands flat on the table. He was trying to look benevolent now. "It is about the family image. The Holloway block is a premier destination. We have standards. That shack represents everything we are trying to move away from. It is dirty. It is old. It is useless. He paused, waiting for me to crack. We are doing you a favor, he added softly. We will clear the debt of the demolition. We will even cut you a check for the land value, minus the cost of the cleanup. It is more than you deserve, considering you have let it rot for 36 months. I finally shifted in my chair. The leather creaked, a sound that seemed incredibly loud in the sudden silence of the room. I looked at the blueprint. The red X was violent, drawn with anger. It covered the loading bay. It covered the reinforced steel entry points. It covered the underground cooling exchange intake that I had spent 6 months installing under the cover of darkness. You are going to demolish it on Monday, I said. My voice was even, devoid of the trembling they were hoping for. That is the schedule, Gavin said, straightening his tie. The equipment is booked. And the permit? I asked. The question hung in the air. It was a simple, bureaucratic question. In the world of construction and demolition, it was the only question that mattered. You do not knock down a structure in the middle of a city without the city knowing about it. You do not bring heavy machinery onto a lot without a stamped, sealed, and approved document from the Department of Buildings. Gavin let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a bark of incredulity. The permit, he repeated, looking at Renee and Dylan as if I had just asked if the earth was flat. She asks about the permit. He turned his gaze back to me, and his eyes were cold. Aurora, look around you. Look at this office. Look at the skyline out that window. Who do you think built half of it? I had lunch with the zoning commissioner on Tuesday. I play golf with the head of the planning board. Do you think I need a piece of paper to clean up my own backyard? It is not your backyard, I said. It is my property. Independent parcel. Grandma made sure of that. It is in the Holloway block. Gavin roared, his patience finally snapping. He slammed his hand down again. If it is inside these 4 streets, it is mine to manage. I decide what stands and what falls. I managed this family's assets while you were playing with circuit boards in college. I managed this block while you were failing at whatever startup job you claim to have. I do not need a permit to take out the trash. Aurora. He leaned in closer, his face flushing red. I govern this block. I am the permit. There it was. The confession. The hubris. He had just admitted, in front of witnesses, that he intended to bypass the legal process because he believed he was above it. He believed that his last name was a license to do whatever he pleased. He truly thought that because the warehouse looked abandoned, no one at the city would care if it disappeared over a weekend. He was right about one thing. If it were truly an abandoned warehouse, the city might look the other way. They might slap him with a small fine later, which he would pay from his petty cash, and everyone would move on. But he was wrong about what was inside. I looked at Dylan. He was staring at the table, refusing to witness the slaughter. I looked at Renee. She was smirking, already mentally spending the commission she would get from leasing the new parking spaces. I looked down at my wrist. It was 2:00 in the afternoon. Okay, I said. Gavin blinked. The fight went out of him, replaced by confusion. Okay. You made your decision, I said. Standing up, I picked up my bag. I did not touch the blueprint. You said Monday, 8:00. Yes, Gavin said, suspicious now. Monday. Don't try to lock the gate. Aurora, the bolt cutters will go through it in 2 seconds. I wouldn't dream of it, I said. It causes too much damage to the fence. I turned and walked toward the door. The carpet was thick, muffling my footsteps. I could feel their eyes on my back. They were exchanging glances, wondering why I had folded so easily. They probably thought I was in shock. They probably thought I was going home to cry into a pillow and accept my defeat. Aurora, Gavin called out just as I reached the handle. It is for the best. You will see. Once it is paved over, you will thank us. I didn't turn around. I just opened the door and walked out into the hallway. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, the mask of indifference dropped, replaced by cold precision. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers moved across the screen with muscle memory. I did not open my contacts list. I did not scroll through social media. I opened an encrypted messaging app that looked like a calculator to anyone glancing over my shoulder. I typed a single sequence of words. Plan B. They showed their hand. Monday, 0800. I hit send. The message vanished, replaced by a confirmation code, and then the screen went black. I stepped out of the building and into the bright sunlight of Ridgeport. The air smelled of exhaust and heated asphalt. I walked 2 blocks to where my sedan was parked, got in, and drove. I didn't go home. I drove to the warehouse. From the outside, it was exactly what Gavin said it was. The corrugated metal walls were streaked with 30 years of rust. The windows were high up and covered in grime so thick it looked like black paint. The for lease sign hanging crookedly on the fence was faded to a pale, unreadable yellow. Weeds grew in the cracks of the concrete apron. It looked dead. It looked forgotten. I parked my car around the back, in the blind spot of the streetlights, and waited. The sun went down. The city lights flickered on. The Holloway Block office tower, where my family was likely toasting to their victory with expensive scotch, glowed like a beacon of self-importance in the distance. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the street was empty. Then, a vehicle turned the corner. It was a white box van. No logos, no markings, no license plates that would register on a standard civilian scanner. It moved with a quiet, well-oiled efficiency that betrayed its generic appearance. It pulled up to the gate of my abandoned warehouse. I didn't move to open the gate. I didn't need to. The driver didn't honk. A side door of the warehouse, one that looked like a rusted slab of metal fused to the wall, clicked. It slid open silently on hydraulic tracks that were concealed behind the facade. A figure stepped out, dressed in gray coveralls, and approached the gate from the inside. They unlocked it, swung it open, and the van rolled inside. The gate closed. The hydraulic door slid shut. Silence returned to the street. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a drug deal or a drop-off for stolen goods. My family, had they been watching, would have been confused. But they weren't watching. They were sleeping the deep, dreamless sleep of the arrogant. They were dreaming of asphalt and parking stripes. They were dreaming of bulldozers crushing my legacy. I sat in my car and watched the building. I knew what was happening inside. I knew the van was currently offloading backup drive servers and additional redundant power supplies. I knew the technicians were checking the Halon fire suppression system and the biometric logs. Gavin thought he was clearing a vacant lot. He thought he was crushing a soda can. He had no idea he was about to swing a sledgehammer into a nuclear reactor. I started my engine and pulled away, leaving the warehouse to its secrets. Let them bring the bulldozers on Monday. Let them bring the press if they wanted to. Let Gavin stand there in his hard hat and make a speech about progress and family duty. He wanted to make a scene. I would give him a scene. I knew that when the sun rose on Monday, there would be no sound of diesel engines tearing through metal. There would be no crumbling walls. There would only be the flashing lights of city official vehicles and the very distinctive, metallic click of handcuffs. Gavin wanted to clean up the block. I was going to help him. I was going to start by taking out the trash. The diesel fumes hanging over the western corner of the Holloway Block were thick enough to taste. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, and the air was vibrating with the idle rumble of 2 yellow bulldozers and a massive excavator. They looked like prehistoric beasts waiting for a signal to feed. My uncle, Gavin, stood by the hood of his black luxury sedan, checking his watch. He was wearing a hard hat that looked ridiculous on him, pristine and white, gleaming under the morning sun. It was a prop, just like his smile. I stood 20 feet away, leaning against the fender of my car. I held a travel mug of coffee, though I had not taken a sip. My hands were steady. To my right, Renee was tapping furiously on her phone, likely coordinating the press release about the revitalization of the block. Dylan was pacing, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, looking at the excavator with a mixture of awe and anxiety. "Let's get this moving," Gavin shouted over the engine noise to the foreman. "I want that structure flat by noon. We have a lunch meeting with the developers." The foreman, a burly man with a clipboard, nodded and raised his hand to signal the drivers. The excavator's arm lifted, the hydraulic pistons hissing as they extended. The bucket hovered over the rusted roof of my warehouse, a metal claw ready to tear through the corrugated tin. "Hold it!" The voice did not come from me. It came from a gray sedan that had just screeched to a halt behind the bulldozers, blocking their path. A man stepped out. He was wearing a windbreaker with the city municipal seal on the breast pocket and carrying a thick, ruggedized tablet. He looked annoyed. This was Miles Rourke, a senior building inspector for the city of Ridgeport. I recognized him from the dossier I had compiled 6 months ago. He was known for being by the book, immune to charm, and perpetually exhausted by developers trying to cut corners. The foreman signaled the excavator to pause. The claw froze in midair. Gavin's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with his white collar. He marched over to the newcomer. "Who are you?" "We are on a schedule here." "Miles Rourke, City Inspection Services," the man said, not even looking up from his tablet. He scrolled through a digital document, his brow furrowed. "I have a demolition order here for Parcel 4B. That's this structure." "Yes, that is the structure," Gavin snapped. "It is a derelict storage unit. We are removing a hazard. You can do your post-demo survey this afternoon." Rourke finally looked up. He had tired eyes, but they were sharp. He looked at the warehouse, then back at his screen. Then he looked at the warehouse again. "Sir, the demolition permit was flagged by the automated system this morning at 7:30. There is a classification error." "There is no error," Gavin said, his voice rising. "It is a Class C storage shed. It has been abandoned for 3 years. It is rotting. Look at it." Rourke walked past Gavin, ignoring him completely. He approached the building. He didn't look at the rust. He looked at the foundation. He looked at the ventilation hooded vents on the roof that were cleverly disguised to look like old chimney stacks. He walked to the electrical meter on the side of the building. I watched him closely. He was good. He noticed the meter was spinning. A derelict building does not consume 400 amps of continuous power. "This building is drawing a significant load," Rourke said, turning back to the group. "And the municipal database has a zoning conflict. The parcel is listed as mixed-use industrial, but the safety rating on the permit application says non-structural storage. Those two things don't match." "It is a glitch," Gavin insisted, following him. "Just sign off on the clearance so we can work. I have the mayor on speed dial. Inspector, do not make me use it." Rourke stopped. He turned to Gavin, and his expression hardened. "Sir, if you call the mayor, tell him that Miles Rourke is doing his job, Code 314. Section B. No demolition can proceed on a structure with active utilities until a visual interior inspection confirms vacancy and hazardous material clearance. That is the law." Gavin scoffed. "It is empty. It is full of rats and dust." "Then show me," Rourke said. He pointed to the side door, the one I had entered through the previous night. "Open it," Gavin gestured to the foreman. "Get the crowbar. Pop the lock." The foreman grabbed a 3-foot steel bar from his truck and started walking toward the door. "I wouldn't do that," I said, my voice cut through the tension. Everyone turned to look at me. I pushed off my car and walked slowly toward them. I didn't look at Gavin. I looked at the foreman. "That is a reinforced steel security door," I said calmly. "If you try to pry it open, you will trigger a silent alarm that alerts the county sheriff of a forced entry in progress. And since you are holding a weapon, they might not ask questions when they arrive." Gavin laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "She is bluffing. Crack it open." The foreman hesitated. He looked at the door. It looked old, but the frame was flush with the wall in a way that suggested solidity. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key card. It was not a brass key. It was a matte black RFID card with a holographic chip embedded in the center. "I will open it," I said, stepping between the foreman and the door. "To avoid anyone being charged with a felony this early in the morning." "You don't have a key to this trash heap," Gavin spat. "You haven't been inside in years." I didn't answer. I held the card up to a patch of rust on the wall next to the door. to the naked eye. It looked like just another spot of corrosion. But under the paint, the reader beeped. A low, heavy thud echoed from inside the wall as the magnetic locks disengaged. Then, the hydraulic hiss I loved so much filled the air. The heavy steel door slid open. The effect was instantaneous. It was like opening the airlock of a spaceship. A gust of cool, sterile air rushed out, hitting us in the face. It smelled of ozone and antiseptic, completely overpowering the diesel fumes outside. The hum of high-performance cooling fans spilled out, a steady, rhythmic drone that signaled massive computing power and climate regulation. Gavin's mouth fell open. Dylan took a step back. Renee dropped her phone. Inspector Rourke stepped forward, his eyes widening. Inside, there were no piles of old furniture. There were no rats. There was a corridor with white, pharmaceutical-grade flooring that gleamed under the harsh LED strip lighting. To the left and right were rows of sealed glass doors, behind which stood rack after rack of black server towers and stainless steel refrigeration units. The walls were lined with digital temperature displays, all showing steady readings in green text. Rourke walked into the corridor. He looked at a yellow and black placard bolted to the inner wall. "Temperature-controlled chain of custody," Rourke read aloud. "Authorized personnel only. Biological hazard level 2. He spun around, his face pale. "Who is the site administrator?" "I am," I said, stepping into the cool light of the facility. "This is a live facility," Rourke said, his voice shaking slightly. He looked at Gavin, who was staring into the hallway as if he were looking at a ghost. "You told me this was a shed. You told me it was abandoned." "I didn't know," Gavin stammered. "She hid it." Rourke pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't look tired anymore. He looked terrified. He dialed a number and put it to his ear. "Dispatch, this is Rourke. I need an immediate stop work order on the Holloway site. Yes, the whole block. Flag it as a critical infrastructure hazard. I am looking at a biological storage facility that was 5 minutes away from being breached by heavy machinery." He hung up and turned to Gavin. "Do you have any idea what happens if an excavator punctures a biocontainment unit? Do you have any idea of the federal fines involved in destroying clinical trial data?" "It is just computers," Gavin yelled, trying to regain control, though his voice was thin. "She is playing games. It is just a server farm." "It is not just a server farm," I corrected him. I walked over to one of the refrigeration units visible through the glass inner door. I tapped the glass. "This unit contains tissue samples for a Phase 3 oncology trial currently being conducted by a lab in Boston. They pay for off-site redundancy. That unit over there holds the cryptographic keys for a fintech startup in Chicago. They require physical isolation for their data." I turned to Rourke. "Inspector, this facility operates under a strict service level agreement. The uptime requirement is 99.99%. The contract penalties for interruptions start at $200,000 per hour." Dylan let out a choked sound. $200,000 per hour? I repeated. "The total value of the active service contracts managed in this building is $5.6 million annually. That is not the value of the building. That is just the revenue." The silence that followed was absolute. The rumble of the bulldozers outside seemed miles away. $5.6 million, Gavin whispered. He looked at the rust on the outside of the door, then at the pristine lab inside. He couldn't reconcile the two images. His brain was failing to process the deception. Rourke was writing furiously on his tablet. "This is a nightmare," he muttered. "A logistical nightmare." He looked at me. "Do you have the permits for this? The zoning variances?" "Everything is filed under the holding company name, Argus Logistics," I said. "It is a subsidiary I formed 3 years ago. The city approved the retrofitting permit. The fire marshal signed off on the halon system last month. The health department inspects the biostorage quarterly. It is all in the system. Inspector, you just have to look under the correct tax ID, not the Holloway Family Trust." Rourke tapped his screen, searching. A moment later, he stopped. He let out a long breath. "Argus Logistics, here it is, valid through next year, fully compliant." He looked at Gavin with pure disgust. You filed a demolition permit for a property you didn't even bother to research. You lied on the application about the building's usage. You tried to bulldoze a facility housing active biological agents and secure data. It is on my land, Gavin screamed, his composure shattering completely. It is the Holloway block. I own the dirt. I don't care if you own the magma in the center of the earth, Rourke snapped. You cannot demolish a regulated facility without a federal hazmat review. That takes 6 months minimum, and you certainly can't do it when there are active contracts involved. Rourke stepped out of the building and waved his arms at the excavator driver. Shut it down. Turn it off now. The driver killed the engine. The silence that fell over the lot was heavy and suffocating. Rourke turned back to us. He was writing a citation, the stylus hitting the screen with angry taps. I am flagging this entire parcel. I am transferring the file to the city legal department immediately. No one touches this structure. No one enters. No one exits except authorized staff. If I see so much as a scratch on this exterior siding, I will have the EPA down here so fast your head will spin. He ripped a bright orange sticker off a roll in his bag and slapped it onto the rusted metal next to the door. It read, "Stop work order. Under investigation." Mr. Holloway, Rourke said, handing Gavin a digital receipt. You are looking at a code violation that carries a mandatory court appearance. And frankly, if this lady here decides to sue you for business interruption, I will be the first one to testify that you were negligent. Gavin held the digital pad like it was radioactive. He looked at me. His eyes were full of hate, but also something else. Fear. For the first time in his life, he was looking at me and seeing someone who could hurt him. You set me up, he hissed. I protected my assets, I replied, my voice cool and steady. I told you on Friday. I asked if you had a permit. You said you didn't need one. I looked at Renee. She was staring at the interior of the warehouse, her mind racing, calculating $5.6 million. She looked at me, and I saw the shift. She wasn't looking at her poor cousin anymore. She was looking at a player. Inspector, I said to Rourke, I have the logs for the door access. I can prove that no unauthorized entry occurred prior to this moment. The chain of custody is intact. Good, Rourke said. Keep those logs. You are going to need them. He walked back to his car, shaking his head. Gavin stood there, the orange sticker glaring at him. The bulldozers sat silent. The abandoned warehouse hummed softly, a fortress of technology wrapped in a disguise of failure. 5.6 million, Dylan whispered again, as if the number was a spell that had paralyzed him. Get in the car. Gavin growled at them. He threw the hard hat onto the ground. It bounced and rolled into a puddle of oil. Meeting in the boardroom, now. He didn't look at me again. He turned and walked away. His shoulders slumped, defeated by a layer of rust and a city inspector who knew how to read a codebook. I stood by the open door, watching them retreat. The cool air from the server room brushed against my neck. They thought the battle was about parking spaces. They thought it was about land. But as I watched Gavin's car peel out of the lot, I knew the truth. This was just the opening move. I had not just saved my building. I had exposed their incompetence. I had shown them that the failure of the family was actually the only one generating real wealth, and I had done it all without raising my voice. I reached out and pressed the button to close the door. The steel slab slid shut, sealing the clean, white world away from the dirt and the noise. The lock engaged with a heavy clunk. Phase 1 was complete. Now, the real questions would start, and I had answers prepared that would tear the Holloway family apart. Piece by piece, the emergency family meeting was called for 3 o'clock that afternoon, and the atmosphere in the boardroom was no longer one of triumphant command. It was the suffocating, heavy air of a courtroom just before a sentencing. The morning sun that had illuminated Gavin's grand declaration of demolition was gone, replaced by the gray afternoon light of a Midwest overcast sky. Gavin was not sitting at the head of the table this time. He was pacing. He moved back and forth in front of the window, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up, revealing the heavy gold watch that suddenly looked like a shackle. Dylan sat hunched over his tablet, his face pale and slick with perspiration. Renee was sitting upright, but she had repositioned her chair. She was no longer angling her body toward Gavin. She was angled slightly toward me. I sat in the same seat I had occupied on Friday. I had not changed my clothes. I had not fixed my hair. I was the only thing in the room that had remained constant. "You embarrassed us," Gavin said. He didn't yell. It was a low, vibrating accusation thrown at the carpet. He stopped pacing and turned to face me. His eyes narrowed into slits. "You stood there, in front of a city official, in front of my contractors, and you made this family look like a chaotic circus." I poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady. "I believe I stopped you from committing a federal crime. Gavin, you should be thanking me." "Thanking you." He slammed his hand on the back of his leather chair. "You blindsided me. You let me file that permit. You let me hire the crew. You waited until the machines were literally running to pull your little stunt. That was calculated. Aurora, that was malicious." "It was necessary," I replied. "If I had told you on Friday that I was running a high-security data center, would you have believed me? Or would you have demanded a tour? Would you have insisted on bringing your investors inside to gawk at the blinking lights?" "I am the head of this block," Gavin roared. "I have a right to know what is happening on my territory." "That is the point, isn't it?" I took a sip of water. "You think it is your territory. You accused me of hiding a business. I didn't hide anything. I simply didn't invite you into it. There is a difference." "You made us look like amateurs," Gavin spat. "Rourke is going to file a report. The city legal department is going to be sniffing around our permits for the next decade because of you. Do you know how hard I worked to get the zoning board to trust us? You torched 20 years of goodwill in 20 minutes. You torched it when you ordered a demolition without an interior inspection," I countered. "Do not shift the blame for your incompetence onto my operations." Dylan suddenly spoke up. His voice was cracked, like he had been holding his breath for hours. $5.6 million. Gavin whipped his head around. "Shut up, Dylan." "No, Uncle Gavin. Listen," Dylan said. Looking up with wide, shocked eyes, he tapped his screen. "I have been running the numbers based on what she said. If she has $5.6 million in annual recurring revenue, that is 3 times the net operating income of the entire retail strip we were planning to build. 3 times. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, there was no pity in his gaze. There was only the raw, hungry math of an accountant realizing he had been counting pennies while standing on a gold mine. "Aurora, is that number verified? Are those contracts multi-year?" 3 to 5-year terms, I said calmly. "With automatic renewal clauses and inflation adjustments, the churn rate is less than 1%. Renee cleared her throat. She smoothed her skirt, and a smile appeared on her face. It was not the sneering smile from Friday. It was a terrifyingly warm, plastic expression. It was the smile of a realtor who just realized the tear-down shack she was selling was actually a historical landmark. "Aurora, sweetie," Renee said, her voice dripping with sudden, unearned intimacy. "We have been going about this all wrong. Tensions were high. We understand that. But we are family. If you have built something this substantial, we should be celebrating it. We should be integrating it." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Imagine the marketing. Holloway Block, the intersection of retail and tech. We could rebrand the whole development around your hub. We could use your revenue stream to leverage better financing for the East Wing renovations. Why didn't you tell us? We could have helped you expand." I looked at her, and I felt a cold knot of disgust in my stomach. Friday, I was a failure. Today, I was a cash cow. They didn't care about the work. They didn't care about the science or the data. They only cared that the rust was actually gold paint. "I didn't tell you," I said, reaching into my bag. "Because I know exactly how this conversation goes. You don't want to help me expand. Renee, you want to absorb me." I pulled a thick folder from my bag and slid it across the mahogany table. It spun smoothly and stopped right in front of Gavin. "Open it," I said. Gavin stared at the folder like it was a bomb. He slowly opened the cover. "That is the deed to the parcel," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Behind it is the original subdivision survey from 1985. Behind that are my business license, my insurance certificates, and my federal compliance audits." Gavin flipped through the pages. His face grew tighter with every sheet. "Read the line under ownership," I instructed. He didn't want to read it. He wanted to burn it, but his eyes dropped to the line. "Owner Aurora Mitchell." He read through gritted teeth. "Parcel status independent, no HOA affiliation, no block management covenant." "Exactly," I said. "Grandma didn't just leave me a warehouse. Gavin, she left me an island. That land is legally distinct from the Holloway block. You have no jurisdiction. You have no management rights. You have no claim to my revenue, my operations, or my future." The room went dead silent. The air conditioner hummed, oblivious to the human wreckage in the room. Gavin closed the folder. He placed his hands flat on top of it, as if trying to physically suppress the truth contained inside. When he looked up, the mask of the concerned patriarch was gone. In its place was something ugly and raw. It was the look of a man who realizes he cannot steal what he wants, so he must destroy the owner instead. "You think you are so smart," Gavin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think because you have some computers and some contracts that you are one of us. You are not one of us. Aurora, you never have been." He stood up and leaned over the table, his shadow stretching toward me. "You are a weirdo. You always were. While Dylan and Renee were learning the business, learning how to talk to people, learning how to build a community, you were in your room taking apart radios. You don't know how to integrate. You don't know how to be part of a team. You are a cold, antisocial hermit who plays with tech toys because you can't handle real human interaction." I didn't flinch. His words were meant to hurt, to trigger the insecurity of the little girl who never fit in at the country club dinners. But they didn't hurt. They just bored me. I remembered the Christmas dinner 4 years ago. I had just secured the seed funding for the retrofitting. I was excited. I had tried to explain the concept of cold storage data preservation to my aunt. Gavin had interrupted me mid-sentence to ask if I was still fixing computers for a living. He had laughed and told the table that I was the family geek squad. Everyone had laughed. They asked when I was going to get a real job like Renee, who sold condos. I had stopped explaining myself that night. I realized then that they didn't want to understand. They needed me to be small so they could feel big. "My tech toys," I said, meeting Gavin's gaze with a flat, unimpressed stare. "Secure the intellectual property of 3 pharmaceutical giants. My antisocial behavior ensures that their secrets are kept safe from corporate espionage. You call it being a hermit. My clients call it discretion, and they pay a premium for it." "It is a blight," Gavin shouted, losing his temper again. "It looks like garbage. You are running a gold mine inside a dumpster, and you are dragging down the value of everything I have built. Do you think I care about your little independent status? This is Ridgeport. This is my town. You think a piece of paper from 1985 is going to stop me?" "It stopped you this morning," I said. Gavin's face twitched. "That was a surprise attack. That won't happen again." He walked over to the window and looked out at the block his kingdom. He took a deep breath, composing himself, pulling the arrogance back around him like a coat. "You have 2 choices. Aurora," he said, not looking at me. "Option 1. You sign a management agreement with Holloway Properties. We take over the exterior maintenance, we integrate the parcel into the block's master plan, and we take 15% of the gross revenue as a management fee. In exchange, we make your building look like it belongs here. We legitimize you." "And option 2? I asked, though I already knew. He turned around. His eyes were cold, dead things. "Option 2 is that we treat you like what you say you are, an outsider, an enemy. You say you are independent fine. Then you better hope your operation is perfect. Because I will be watching. Every truck that comes in, every decibel of noise your cooling fans make, every shadow your building casts. If you step 1 inch out of line, if you violate one single city ordinance, I will bury you in litigation." Renee looked nervous. Daddy, maybe we shouldn't threaten. Quiet, Renee. Gavin snapped. He looked at me. Well, I don't need your legitimacy, I said, standing up. And I don't need your permission. The building stays as it is. The rust stays. It is my camouflage. If you want to sue me, go ahead. My lawyers are already on retainer, and unlike you, they actually read the permits before they file them. I reached over and took my folder back. I held it against my chest, a shield of paper and law. You are making a mistake, Dylan whispered, looking at the floor. He won't stop. Aurora. He can't handle losing. I haven't even started winning yet, I said to Dylan. I turned to leave. I had my hand on the doorknob when Gavin spoke one last time. His voice was calm now, terrifyingly so. It was the voice of a man who had convinced himself that theft was actually justice. You can wave that deed around all you want, Gavin said. You can hide behind your fences and your electronic locks, but you are forgetting the first rule of this family. I paused, but I didn't turn around. If it sits in the Holloway block, Gavin said, enunciating every word with deliberate weight, it belongs to us. We might not own the paper, Aurora, but we own the ground you walk on. You are just a squatter on my legacy, and sooner or later, squatters always get evicted. The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. He wasn't talking about legal eviction anymore. He was talking about war. He was telling me that boundaries, laws, and ownership meant nothing compared to his will. We will see, I said. I opened the door and walked out. The encounter hadn't ended with a truce. It hadn't ended with a negotiation. It had ended with a declaration. Gavin had just admitted that he didn't care about the law. He believed he was the law, and that was exactly what I needed him to believe. Because a man who thinks he is untouchable is a man who leaves his fingerprints on everything. I walked to the elevator, my heart rate steady, my mind clear. He thought he was starting a war for land. He didn't realize he was stepping onto a battlefield I'd been mapping for 3 years. He wanted the block fine. I would let him try to take it, but he was about to find out that the rusting boil he hated so much was actually an ironclad anchor, and he was the one drifting into the storm. I sat in my car in the warehouse lot, watching the red taillights of my family's convoy fade into the gray afternoon. The adrenaline from the confrontation in the boardroom was beginning to ebb, replaced by the familiar, cold clarity that had guided me for the last half-decade. Gavin thought this war was about a parking lot. He thought it was about pride, or aesthetics, or the stubbornness of a niece who refused to fall in line. He was wrong. This wasn't about stubbornness. It was about survival. My mind drifted back 5 years, to a room that smelled of old paper and lemon polish, the office of Mr. Henderson, my grandmother's estate attorney. The reading of the will had been the event of the season for the Holloway family. Gavin had worn his best suit, the one he saved for closings and funerals. Renee had been vibrating with anticipation, already mentally redecorating the penthouse she assumed she would inherit. When Henderson read the distribution of assets, the tension in the room was palpable. Gavin received the controlling interest in the Holloway block management firm. Renee received the residential portfolio. Dylan received the liquid stocks, and then came my name. To my granddaughter, Aurora Mitchell, Henderson had read, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. I leave the structure and land located at the western perimeter of the block, commonly known as the Old Cannery Warehouse. I remembered the silence that followed. It lasted exactly 3 seconds before Gavin snorted, then Renee giggled, then the whole room, save for me and Mr. Henderson, dissolved into polite, pitying laughter. The rat trap, Gavin had chuckled, wiping a tear from his eye. Mother left her the rat trap. Well, I suppose it is fitting. Aurora always did like collecting junk. Maybe she can store her college projects in there. It comes with a stipulation, Henderson had continued, raising his voice slightly to cut through their mirth. The parcel is to be legally severed from the master deed of the Holloway block. It is to be rezoned as an independent entity. free from the covenants and restrictions of the family trust. Gavin had waved his hand dismissively. Fine, fine, sever it, cut it loose. I don't want to pay the insurance on that eyesore anyway. Let her have her little island of rust. They signed the papers that day with smiles on their faces. They thought they were dumping a liability on the black sheep of the family. They thought they were free of a maintenance headache. They didn't read the survey. They didn't look at the geological reports that showed the bedrock beneath that warehouse was the most stable in the entire county. They saw a shed. I saw a bunker. I had just left my position at North Pine Systems Lab 3 months prior. That job had been my real education. North Pine was a flash company. They had a glass-walled data center in Silicon Valley that looked like a jewelry box. They put their servers on display for the world to see. Bathed in blue neon light, they wanted the public to see the technology. Then came the breach. It wasn't a hack. It was physical. A group of corporate espionage agents simply drove a truck through the glass wall. They smashed the racks, stole the drives, and caused $40 million in damage in under 4 minutes. I learned a lesson that day that no university professor could teach. In the world of high-value data, visibility is death. If you look like a bank, someone will try to rob you. If you look like a fortress, someone will try to siege you. But if you look like a pile of garbage, people walk right past you. The day I got the keys to the warehouse, I walked into the dark, dusty cavern. It smelled of stale oil and dead pigeons. The roof leaked, the floor was cracked, but the bones were steel. I spent the next 2 years living a double life. By day, I was the failing niece, the one who couldn't hold down a job, the one who borrowed money for repairs that never seemed to happen. By night, I was a general contractor for the most sophisticated private vault in the state. I hired crews from out-of-state contractors from Ohio and Illinois who didn't know the Holloway name and didn't care about Ridgeport gossip. I had them work graveyard shifts. When the delivery trucks brought the server racks, the cooling units, and the backup generators, they arrived in unmarked vans at 3 a.m. I spent $1.2 million of my own savings and a private loan on the interior. I installed a Faraday cage to block electromagnetic interference. I installed a halon gas fire suppression system that could extinguish a blaze in 10 seconds without damaging a single circuit board. I installed biometric scanners that measured the unique vein patterns in a human hand. But the most expensive part of the renovation was what I didn't do. I didn't paint the exterior. In fact, I hired a scenic artist from a theater company to paint faux rust onto the new steel reinforcements I added to the doors. I kept the broken windows, simply sealing them from the inside with blackout ballistic glass. I found an old, weather-beaten, "For Lease" sign from 1998 and hung it crookedly on the fence. I cultivated the weeds. I made sure the perimeter looked neglected. The best security is boredom. I had told my first client, a research director for a biotech firm developing a cure for a rare blood disease. He had been skeptical when he first pulled up to the gate in his luxury sedan. He looked at the peeling paint and the grim surroundings and nearly drove away. But when I brought him inside, through the airlock, into the humming, pristine white corridor of the server room, his jaw dropped. "Why," he had asked, running a hand over the cold steel of a server rack, "you have a Ferrari engine inside a beat-up station wagon. Your competitors know what a data center looks like," I told him. "They look for cooling towers. They look for security guards in uniforms. They look for fences with razor wire. No one looks twice at a derelict warehouse on the edge of town. If you store your clinical trial data here, the only thing that will try to break in is a stray cat." He signed the contract that afternoon. Then came the others, a risk assessment firm that modeled catastrophic weather events for insurance giants, a private cryptographic key management service. These weren't companies that wanted a fancy lobby to impress investors. They were people who dealt in secrets. They wanted stability. They wanted invisibility. They didn't care that the building was ugly. They cared that it was off the grid. My family thought I was broke because I poured every cent of profit back into the infrastructure. I upgraded the power redundancy. I installed a satellite uplink for emergency data transmission. I built a fortress, and I painted it to look like ruins. It was lonely work. There were Christmases where I sat at the family table, listening to Gavin brag about a new retail strip mall, knowing that the data flowing through my abandoned shed was worth more than his entire development. They would ask me, with that sickeningly sweet condescension, "Aurora, are you still trying to rent out that old place? Maybe you should just lower the price." I would smile and say, "The market is tough right now." I swallowed the insults. I swallowed the pride, because I knew that the moment I showed them what I had built, the safety of my clients would be compromised. The Holloway family couldn't keep a secret. If Gavin knew, he would put it on a billboard. He would brag to his golf buddies, and then the people who wanted to steal my clients' data would know exactly where to look. Grandma knew, not the details, perhaps, but she knew the nature of the family she had built. I remembered the last conversation we had, 2 weeks before she died. She was frail, her voice barely a whisper. Sitting in her sunroom overlooking the garden, she had squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Aurora," she had said, her eyes cloudy but sharp, "you are like your grandfather. You like to build things that last. Your uncle, he likes to build things that shine." She had pulled me closer. "They will try to take it from you, whatever you do with that warehouse. If it becomes valuable, they will try to claim it. It is their nature. They are not bad people, child, but they are hungry, and they are blind. I can handle them," I had promised her. "I know," she whispered. "But remember this, they don't hate you. They hate what they don't understand. And they will never understand you, because you don't need their applause to survive." She was right. Gavin hated the warehouse because it didn't make sense to him. It was a blank space on his map, and his ego couldn't tolerate blank spaces. He needed to pave it, label it, and monetize it. That was why I had prepared the doomsday file from the moment the first server went online. I started documenting. I saved every email from the city. I saved the original survey maps. I saved the receipts for the rust-colored paint. I knew the day would come when Gavin would decide that my silence was an insult he could no longer abide. I knew he would bring the bulldozers. I had warned my clients. 2 days ago, when Gavin slammed the plans on the table, I had sent out a priority distinct encryption key update to all 3 major account holders. Subject perimeter threat level elevated. Physical security protocols active. Data integrity remains 100%. They didn't panic. They trusted me. They knew that I had built this place specifically for the worst-case scenario, but as I sat there in the fading light, listening to the hum of the cooling fans behind the metal walls, I knew that Gavin wasn't the only threat. In fact, compared to what I was really guarding against, Gavin was just a noisy distraction. My hand drifted to the secure phone in my pocket, the one with no GPS and no registered SIM card. I wasn't just hiding this place from my uncle. I wasn't just hiding it from the city zoning board. The reason I had built a fortress inside a shell, the reason I had 3 layers of biometric security and a self-destruct sequence for the data drives, was because of a client I had never met in person. A client who paid via offshore shell corporations. A client who occupied the entire sub-basement level of the facility, a level that even Inspector Rourke hadn't seen, because the door was hidden behind a false electrical panel. Gavin thought he was uncovering a secret business. He had no idea he was kicking a hornet's nest that involved players far more dangerous than a local real estate developer. My phone buzzed. A single text message. No number. News report says, construction halted. Confirm site security. We cannot afford exposure. I typed back a reply. My fingers cold. Local interference only. Site secure. No eyes on the lower level. I deleted the message immediately. Gavin wanted to steal the land. He wanted the prestige. He didn't know that if he had actually succeeded in tearing down that wall today, if he had exposed the sub-basement to the light of day, the people who paid for that storage wouldn't have sued us. They wouldn't have filed a complaint with the city. They would have simply removed us. I looked at the warehouse one last time. It looked so fragile in the twilight. A rusting box sitting on a ticking bomb. I started the car. I had won the battle with my family, but by bringing the city inspector into the mix, I had drawn attention. and attention was the one thing the things in the basement could not survive. The war for the land was just a cover story. The real war was keeping the world from finding out what was sleeping 20 feet beneath the concrete, and I was the only gatekeeper left. The Tuesday morning sun did not bring clarity. It brought a legal storm front that was darker and heavier than the overcast sky above Ridgeport. I sat in the minimalist, glass-walled office of Marcus Thorne, my attorney, listening to the silence that followed his review of the incident report. Marcus was a man who spoke in billable increments, precise and devastating. He placed the file on his desk, removed his reading glasses, and looked at me with an expression that was halfway between impressed and terrified. "Aurora," he said, his voice low, "I hope you understand the bullet you dodged yesterday. If that excavator bucket had breached the containment wall of your facility, we would not be discussing a civil suit for property damage. We would be discussing criminal negligence on a scale that puts people in federal prison." "I know," I said. "That is why I stopped them." "You stopped the physical act," Marcus corrected, "but the legal machinery your uncle set in motion, that is still grinding." He tapped the file. "I have been reviewing the demolition order. In my 20 years of practice, I have never seen a demolition permit issued this quickly for a structure of that size. Usually, there is a 30-day review period, public comment, environmental impact surveys. This was pushed through in 48 hours. He leaned forward. "This wasn't just administrative incompetence, Aurora. This was a bypass. Someone lubricated the gears." That was the first domino. The idea that Gavin hadn't just been arrogant, but active. "What are our options?" I asked. "We go on the offensive," Marcus said. "We don't just defend the warehouse. We investigate the permit itself. If we can prove there was fraud in the application process, we don't just stop the demolition. We invalidate Gavin's authority over the entire block's management." I left his office with a singular mission. I didn't go back to the warehouse immediately. Instead, I went to a coffee shop across from the city hall, opened my laptop, and accessed the public records database. But I didn't just look at the public interface. I used the credentials I had legitimately acquired during my initial zoning application to dig into the metadata of the filings. It didn't take long. The order to demolish was based on a citation filed 2 weeks ago. The citation labeled my property as a blight structure, and more dangerously, an imminent public hazard. The reasoning listed was structural instability and rodent infestation. I stared at the screen. My structural integrity was reinforced steel. My pest control was hospital grade. Then I saw the signature on the affidavit of inspection. It wasn't a city inspector. It was a third-party contractor named Apex Assessments. A quick cross-reference of the business registry revealed that Apex Assessments shared a registered agent address with Holloway Property Management. Gavin had hired his own shell company to declare my building a hazard, then used that report to fast-track the city permit. It was fraud, pure and simple. But why? Why risk prison time for 40 parking spaces? The math didn't work. Even with prime downtown rates, it would take 20 years of parking fees to justify the bribes and the risk. Gavin was greedy. But he wasn't stupid. He was desperate. The answer arrived in my inbox at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, delivered by the incompetence of a demolition contractor. My phone pinged. It was an email from the foreman of the crew that had been on site yesterday. He was sending a bill for the wasted day and the equipment rental fees. He was angry, and in his anger, he had hit reply all to the email thread he had been having with Gavin. Instead of just emailing me the invoice, the subject line was "Re-urgent. Clearance deadline." I scrolled down past the invoice, down past the angry demands for payment, to the original message thread at the bottom. There was an email from Gavin to the demolition company, dated last Thursday. "Get it done by Monday. No excuses. The Marrow Line deal closes on Wednesday, but only if the parcel is clear. They want a clean slate for the retail expansion. If that shed is still standing, the liquidity event is off the table." I froze. Marrow Line Development was not a local player. They were a national conglomerate known for buying up entire city blocks, razing them to the ground, and building mixed-use high-rises that looked like spaceships. They didn't buy parking lots. They bought footprints. Gavin wasn't trying to build a parking lot. He was trying to sell the Holloway block. All of it. He was cash poor. I knew the family trust had been bleeding money on the East Wing renovations. He was trying to cash out, take a check for $50 or $60 million, and walk away. But Marrowline obviously had a condition: they wanted the whole block, or nothing. And my independent parcel was the missing tooth in the smile they wanted to buy. He couldn't sell my land because he didn't own it, so he decided to erase the building, pave it over, and hope that once it was just asphalt, Marrowline wouldn't check the deed too closely until after the check cleared. "You desperate fool," I whispered to the screen. I needed leverage. I had the fraud, but fraud takes months to prove in court. I needed something physical, something immediate. I called a survey company I had used during the initial renovation. "I need a boundary stakeout," I told them. "Emergency rates apply. I need it done today." By 4 o'clock, 2 men in orange vests were walking the perimeter of my lot with laser theodolites and GPS poles. I stood by the fence, watching them. Gavin came out of the office tower, watching from the distant steps like a gargoyle. But he didn't approach. The orange stop work sticker on my door was a force field he dared not cross. The lead surveyor, a man named Evans, waved me over. He was standing near the edge of my lot, where the asphalt of the main Holloway block driveway met the cracked concrete of my sector. "Ms. Mitchell," Evans said, looking at his data collector, "we have a discrepancy between the physical use and the deed lines." "Show me," I said. He pointed to a line of spray paint he had just put on the ground. It wasn't where the fence was. It was 12 feet further out, cutting right across the main entrance lane that led to the underground parking garage of the Holloway office tower. "Your deed is based on the 1985 plat," Evans explained. "Back then, this was all one cannery complex. When the parcel was severed, the line was drawn here." He tapped the paint. "The current driveway for the main tower, the landscaping, the utility box for their streetlights, it is all sitting on your land, about 1,200 square feet of it." I looked at the paint. I looked at the luxury cars driving over my land to get to Gavin's building. "Thank you. Mr. Evans," I said. "Please mark it permanently." I walked back to my car and called Marcus. "Draft a cease and desist," I said. "I want to block access to the western driveway of the Holloway Tower. It is trespassing on my property." "Aurora," Marcus warned. "That is the nuclear option. If you block that driveway, they can't access their parking garage. They will claim prescriptive easement. They have been using that driveway for 20 years. If they can prove open, notorious, and hostile use for that period, the court will grant them the land." "They can't prove it was hostile," I said, opening my glove compartment. I pulled out a yellowed piece of paper encased in a plastic sleeve. It was a letter from my grandmother, dated 1995, addressed to the Holloway Management Trust. "I have a letter," I told Marcus. Grandmother explicitly granted Gavin revocable permission to use that strip of land for the driveway until such time as the warehouse required the space. She gave him permission. "Marcus, that means it wasn't hostile. It was a license, and I'm revoking the license." Marcus laughed, a dry, sharp sound. "Send me a picture of that letter. If that holds up, you don't just own a warehouse, you have a chokehold on their building." I hung up. I felt a surge of triumph, but it was quickly tempered by the buzzing of my other phone, the secure line. It wasn't a text this time. It was a call. I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't take a call from the sub-basement client while standing in the open, but the vibration of the phone was a reminder the more noise I made, the more I risked exposing the very thing I was trying to protect. I was about to leave when a gray sedan pulled up. It was Inspector Miles Rourke. He didn't look like an enemy today. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle that had too many pieces. He got out of his car and walked over to me. He was holding a file folder. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "we need to talk. Is there a problem with the stop work order?" I asked. "No," Rourke said. "The order stands, but I have been down at the archives all afternoon. I was pulling the history on this site." He leaned against his car, looking at my rusted building. I found something interesting. The application to label this building as blight, the one that triggered the demolition permit, it was flagged in our system as a priority review. What does that mean? It means someone high up pushed it, Rourke said. But that is not the weird part. The weird part is that the digital signature on the priority flag belongs to a clerk who retired 3 years ago. Her account should have been deactivated. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. Someone isn't just bending the rules, Ms. Mitchell. Someone is hacking the city's administrative network to alter records. They are resurrecting dead accounts to approve permits. My blood ran cold. Gavin didn't know how to hack a city network. Gavin typed with 2 fingers. Dylan was an accountant, not a hacker. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because, Rourke said, lowering his voice, I have been an inspector for 15 years. Developers play dirty. They bribe. They lie. But they don't hack municipal servers. This isn't just a real estate grab. This feels like cleanup. He stepped closer. You told me you have sensitive data in there. $5.6 million worth. Is it possible that someone wants that building gone not because of the land, but because of what is on those drives? I kept my face perfectly neutral, but my mind was racing. Marrowline, the development company. My clients have enemies, I said carefully. Corporate espionage is a reality of my business. This feels bigger than corporate, Rourke said. I am going to keep digging, but I'm telling you this as a warning. Whoever is trying to knock this building down has access to the city's back end. That means they are inside the house, so to speak. Be careful. He got back in his car and drove away. I stood there, the wind whipping my hair across my face. I had thought this was a family squabble. I had thought it was Gavin trying to make a quick buck to save his reputation. And maybe, for Gavin, that was all it was. He was just a pawn. But Marrowline, or whoever was pulling the strings at Marrowline, they weren't just buying land. They had compromised the city's network to ensure this building was destroyed. The leaked email said, "Deal closes if warehouse cleared." They didn't want the warehouse for parking. They didn't want it for the footprint. Rourke was right. They wanted it gone. I looked at the rusted metal walls. Somewhere in my server racks, or perhaps in the cold storage in the basement that technically didn't exist on any blueprint, there was something that Marrowline or their backers wanted to destroy. Gavin was the bulldozer, but someone else was driving him. I looked at the spray paint on the ground. I had just declared war on my family over a strip of asphalt. I had cornered a desperate animal. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the block in long, jagged shadows, I realized that I wasn't the hunter I thought I was. They weren't trying to evict me. They were trying to sanitize the site. I pulled out my phone and texted Marcus, "File the cease and desist. Block the driveway. We need to freeze everything." Then I texted the number that had called me earlier. External threat vector identified. It is not just the family. It is the buyers. Initiate level 4 counter surveillance. I got in my car and locked the doors. The click was loud in the silence. They wanted to erase my warehouse. But the thing I feared most wasn't the destruction of the building. It was that they wanted to erase the evidence of what was inside. And if they couldn't knock the building down, they might try to burn it out. The conference room on Wednesday morning smelled of floor wax and expensive cologne, a scent that I had always associated with my uncle's specific brand of coercion. This time, however, the seating arrangement was different. Gavin sat at the head of the table, flanked by his attorney, a man named Sterling who wore a suit that cost more than my first car. Renee and Dylan were present, looking like children who had been called to the principal's office. On my side of the table sat Marcus Thorne, my attorney, and Ms. Vance from the city attorney's office. I had insisted on her presence. Gavin had assumed she was there to mediate a surrender. He thought I had called this meeting to negotiate the terms of my capitulation, to accept a settlement check and walk away from the eyesore that was ruining his view. He was in for a very long morning. "Let's make this quick," Gavin said, leaning back in his chair and clasping his hands behind his head. He didn't look at me. He looked at Marcus. "We are prepared to offer your client a nuisance fee." We will cover the legal costs she has incurred so far, provided she drops the objection to the demolition and signs a quitclaim deed by 5 o'clock today. We have a schedule to keep." Sterling opened a folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the polished mahogany. $20,000, Sterling said, plus the cost of the fence repair. It is a generous offer for a parcel that has been red tagged by the city. I didn't pick up the paper. I didn't even look at it. I looked at Ms. Vance, then at Gavin. "We are not here to discuss the demolition," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the acoustic perfection of the boardroom, it carried like a bell. "That is currently under a stop work order which, as Ms. Vance can confirm, will remain in place pending the fraud investigation." Gavin's jaw tightened. "Then why are we here?" "We are here to discuss rent," I said. Renee let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Rent? You think we are going to pay you rent for that shack?" "Not for the shack," I corrected. "For the driveway." I nodded to Marcus. He opened his briefcase and produced a large, rolled-up document. He stood up and unrolled it across the center of the table. It was the fresh survey map that Evans had completed the previous afternoon. The lines were crisp and black, but the most important features were marked in bright, undeniable red ink. "This is a certified boundary survey completed yesterday," Marcus explained, his tone clinical. "As you can see, the legal boundary of the independent parcel owned by Ms. Mitchell extends 12 feet into what is currently the primary ingress and egress lane for the Holloway block parking structure." I watched Gavin's eyes follow the red line. I saw the moment the realization hit him. The driveway he had been using for 20 years, the grand entrance to his office tower, was built on dirt he didn't own. "This is ridiculous," Gavin sputtered, reaching for the map. "We have used that driveway for decades. It is common usage." "It was permissive usage," I interrupted, sliding the copy of Grandmother's letter across the table. Grandmother granted the Holloway Trust a revocable license to use that strip of land. A license, Gavin, not an easement, and as of this morning, I have revoked it. "You can't do that," Sterling interjected, though he was reading the letter with intense focus. "This creates a landlocked condition for the parking structure." "Not my problem," I said. "You have a back entrance on 4th Street. It is inconvenient. Yes. It is narrow. Yes. But you are not landlocked. You just lost your front door." "You are petty," Renee hissed. "You are doing this just to be spiteful." "I am protecting my property rights," I replied. "But there is more." I pointed to a second red line on the map, this one dashing across the corner of the lot. "When I had the surveyors out, they also scanned for underground utilities," I said. "It turns out, when you renovated the tower 10 years ago, you didn't want to pay the city to rip up the main road to lay your new fiber optic cables and your backup water main. So, you cut a corner, literally." I tapped the map. "The high-speed fiber line that services this entire building runs diagonally through my soil. You never asked for an easement. You never paid for the right-of-way. You just buried it and hoped no one would notice." The silence in the room was absolute. Dylan was staring at the map, his face draining of color. He knew what that fiber line meant. It was the lifeline for the financial firms renting the top floors. If that line was severed, the building went dark. "I am prepared to offer you an easement," I said, leaning forward. "I am not unreasonable. I will grant you the right to keep your driveway and your cables where they are." Gavin looked at me, wary. "For how much?" "Market rate," I said, "plus retroactive compensation for unauthorized use of the land for the past 10 years. My appraisers have calculated the value based on the commercial square footage of downtown Ridgeport." Marcus slid a second document across the table. It was a contract. The number at the bottom was not $20,000. $250,000 per year, Marcus read, with a lump sum payment of $1.5 million for past usage, due within 30 days. "You are insane," Gavin shouted, standing up so abruptly his chair tipped over. "You are trying to extort your own family, $1.5 million. We don't have that kind of liquidity sitting around for a driveway." Then dig it up, I said coldly. Move your road, move your cables. But if you touch one shovel to my dirt without a check in my hand, I will have the sheriff here for trespassing before the dust settles. Aurora, Gavin pleaded, his voice cracking. He put his hands on the table, leaning his weight on them. We are family. You can't do this. We are blood. You are squeezing us dry. I looked him in the eye. I waited for a long moment, letting his words hang in the air, letting everyone in the room taste the hypocrisy of them. Family, I repeated. Which family was it that voted to bulldoze my property on Monday morning? Which family stood in this room 5 days ago and called me a failure? Which family tried to erase my livelihood without even a phone call? That was business, Gavin yelled. We were trying to improve the block. And this is business, I said. I am improving my bottom line. Dylan spoke up. His voice was quiet, trembling. Uncle Gavin, just pay it. If we lose the fiber line, the tenants on the 12th floor will void their leases. We can't afford that. We can't afford the $1.5 million either, Gavin snapped at him. Not with the renovations running over budget. Why are you so desperate for the parking? Dylan asked. It was the question that had been eating at him. He looked at his uncle, confusion warring with suspicion. I ran the projections. Uncle Gavin, even with 40 new spots, it takes 10 years to make back the cost of the demolition and the paving. Why are you rushing this? Why are you risking jail time and fraud charges for a parking lot that doesn't make financial sense? Gavin froze. He looked at Dylan, then at the city attorney, then at me. It is about long-term value. Dylan, you lack vision. No, I said. It is not about vision. It is about the closing conditions. I reached into my bag for the final document. This was the weapon I had been saving. It was the document my contact had pulled from the digital trash bin of the demolition contractor, the draft agreement that Gavin thought was secret. Marrow line development, I said. The color left Gavin's face entirely. He looked like he had been struck. I have here a draft purchase agreement between the Holloway Trust and Marrow Line Development, I said, placing the document on the table. It outlines the sale of the entire Holloway block for the sum of $58 million. Renee gasped. $58 million. You are selling the block, Daddy. You said we were refinancing. He is selling, I said, looking at Renee. But there is a catch. Section 4, Paragraph 2. I read from the page. The sale is contingent upon the delivery of the assemblage free and clear of all existing structures on the western perimeter parcel, currently identified as the Old Cannery Warehouse. The seller guarantees that said parcel is part of the Holloway management control and will be vacant at closing. I looked up. He can't sell the block unless he delivers my land. And he can't deliver my land because he doesn't own it. That is why he needed the demolition. He needed to erase the building so he could present a flat, paved lot to the buyers and pretend it was just part of the common area. He was going to sell my property to a developer and pocket the money. That is a lie, Gavin screamed. That is a draft. It was never signed. I never agreed to include your parcel. Ms. Vance, I said, turning to the city attorney, I am submitting this document into the record. As you can see on the final page, there is an electronic signature dated last Thursday. It matches the metadata of the emails sent from Gavin's office. I held up the page with the digital stamp. He signed a contract to sell property he does not legally possess. He attempted to destroy a structure he does not own to fulfill a fraudulent contract. In legal terms, I believe that is called conversion, and potentially grand larceny. Ms. Vance adjusted her glasses. She looked at the contract, then at Gavin. Her expression was severe. Mr. Holloway, if this document is authentic, you have attempted to mislead a city investigation regarding the demolition permit. You claimed the demolition was for safety and improvement. This evidence suggests it was for financial gain based on a misrepresentation of ownership. It is a fabrication, Gavin shouted, but his voice was thin, hysterical. She forged it. She is good with computers. She made it up. We can have the forensic team verify the server logs. Ms., Vance said calmly, if the email came from your domain, we will know. Dylan stood up slowly. He looked at the contract, then at his uncle. You were going to sell everything, the office, the legacy grandma's work, and you weren't going to tell us. I was saving us, Gavin pleaded, turning to his nephew. The debts are piling up. Dylan, the East Wing is a money pit. Maroline offered a lifeline. I was going to give everyone a share. I was going to take care of you. By stealing from Aurora, Dylan asked. By committing fraud. She wasn't using it, Gavin cried, pointing a trembling finger at me. It is a rusty box. It is nothing. Why should a pile of junk stop a $50 million deal that saves this family? Because it is mine, I said. The room fell silent again. Gavin slumped into his chair, defeated by the weight of the paper on the table. He had been exposed, not just as a bully, but as a failure who was trying to liquidate the family history to cover his own mismanagement. Ms. Vance, I said, I am formally requesting that the city open an investigation into the attempted sale of my property without my consent, and I am requesting that the stop work order be made permanent until this legal dispute is resolved. Granted, Ms. Vance said, making a note on her pad. I will also be forwarding this to the district attorney's office for review regarding the permit application. I stood up. I gathered my maps and my surveys. The offer for the easement stands for 48 hours, I told Gavin. $1.5 million for the back rent, $250,000 a year moving forward. If you don't pay, I cut the fiber line on Friday at noon. We don't have the money, Gavin whispered. Then I suggest you ask your friends at Maroline for a loan, I said, although I doubt they will be very happy to hear that the land they wanted to buy is actually an impenetrable fortress owned by the woman you just tried to rob. I walked toward the door. Renee was staring at the table, tears streaming down her face, her dreams of a real estate empire crumbling. Dylan was looking at Gavin with a mixture of pity and disgust. Gavin didn't look up. He was staring at the map, at the red line that cut across his world, realizing that the boundary he had ignored for so long was now the wall against which he would be crushed. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. Marcus followed me. That was brutal, Marcus said quietly as we walked to the elevator. That was necessary, I replied. You know this isn't over, Marcus warned. Gavin is desperate, and Maroline, if they want that land that badly, they won't just walk away because of a contract dispute. You just poked a much bigger bear. I know, I said. I checked my phone. There was a notification from my security system, a proximity alert at the warehouse perimeter. I stopped. I opened the live feed. The camera showed a black SUV parked just outside the gate. It wasn't Gavin's car. It wasn't the city inspector. The window rolled down, and a man took a picture of my building. Then he looked directly at the camera, as if he knew exactly where the lens was hidden in the rust. Marcus was right. I had checkmated Gavin, but by exposing the Maroline deal, I had forced the real enemy to step out of the shadows. The legal battle was won, but the siege was just beginning. Thursday morning did not begin with the chirping of birds or the gentle hum of traffic. It began with an invasion. I was in the control room, reviewing the overnight server logs. When the perimeter sensors lit up like a Christmas tree, I looked at the external monitors and saw a cavalcade of white SUVs and red trucks swarming the entrance of the Holloway block. It wasn't the police, and it wasn't the demolition crew. It was something far more bureaucratic and, in many ways, far more destructive. It was the fire marshal, the health department, and the electrical safety board. I watched from the screen as Gavin stepped out of the main office tower. He wasn't looking terrified this time. He was smiling. It was a tight, predatory smile. He pointed a finger directly at my warehouse, gesturing emphatically to a man in a white uniform who I recognized as Chief Inspector Vance of the fire department. My phone rang. It was Marcus, my attorney. Aurora, Marcus said. His voice clipped. We just got a notification. An anonymous tip was filed late last night claiming that your facility is storing volatile chemical accelerants, and operating an unlicensed high-voltage reactor in a residential adjacent zone. They have an emergency warrant to inspect for immediate public safety hazards. "It is Gavin," I said, watching my uncle play the concerned citizen on the monitor. "He is trying to swarm me. If they find one code violation, one loose wire, they can shut the power purely for safety reasons. They are looking for an excuse to pull the meter," Marcus agreed. "If the power goes, your contracts are breached." "Let them in," I said. "Are you sure?" "I am opening the gate now. Tell them to wipe their feet." I hung up and triggered the gate release. Gavin's smile widened as the trucks rolled onto my lot. He thought he had me. He thought that because his buildings were held together with duct tape and prayers, mine must be too. He assumed that industrial warehouse meant dirty. He was about to learn the difference between neglect and camouflage. Chief Vance banged on the steel door. I opened it immediately. Behind him stood 4 other inspectors, clipboards ready, eyes scanning for danger. "Ms. Mitchell," Vance asked, his tone aggressive. "We have reports of hazardous materials." "I have a Class B biological storage license and a Tier 4 electrical permit," I said, stepping aside. "All active, all inspected. Please, come in. The cleanroom protocols require shoe covers, which are available in the vestibule." Vance blinked. He looked at the rusted exterior, then at the gleaming white vestibule. He looked at the shoe covers dispenser. He looked at the digital air quality monitor on the wall that showed fewer particulates than a hospital operating room. They spent 3 hours inside. They checked the fire suppression system. It was a dual-stage halon setup, serviced 2 weeks ago. They checked the electrical panels. Every cable was labeled. Every breaker was digital. And the thermal load was well within the green zone. They checked the chemical storage. The coolant for the servers was stored in double-walled tanks with leak detection sensors. I walked with them, holding my binder of certifications. I answered every question before they finished asking it. I showed them the logs. I showed them the backup generator maintenance schedule. By noon, Chief Vance was no longer aggressive. He was confused. "Ms. Mitchell," Vance said, standing in the main corridor. "This facility is over-engineered. You have safeguards here I usually only see at the airport." "I take safety very seriously, Chief," I said. "As you can see, the volatile accelerants are non-flammable synthetic coolants, and the reactor is a standard backup diesel generator. Currently cold." Vance nodded, signing his clipboard. The complaint was exaggerated, grossly. He turned to leave. I walked them to the door. Outside, Gavin was waiting. He was leaning against his car, arms crossed, expecting to see me being sighted, expecting to see the power company truck pulling my meter. "Well," Gavin called out as Vance stepped into the sunlight, "did you shut it down? Is it safe?" Vance adjusted his hat. He looked at Gavin. Then he looked at the Holloway office tower looming behind him. He looked at the tangle of power lines running from the street pole to the tower's roof lines that were sagging suspiciously. "The warehouse is compliant," Vance said. "In fact, it is the safest structure I have inspected all month." Gavin's face dropped. "That is impossible. It is a ruin. Did you check the wiring?" "The wiring is mil-spec," Vance said. "However," Vance turned his body, shifting his attention from my warehouse to Gavin's tower. The other inspectors followed his gaze. "Since we are already on site for a block-wide safety audit based on the complaint," Vance said slowly, "and since the complaint alleged hazardous electrical fluctuations in the immediate vicinity." He pointed to the main service box on the side of the Holloway tower. It was rusted shut, and I could see scorch marks around the conduit entry from 20 feet away. "We need to verify the source of the grid instability," Vance said. "We need access to your mechanical room, Mr. Holloway, now." "What?" Gavin took a step back. "No, you are here for her, not me." "The warrant covers the affected zone," Vance said, his voice hardening. "That includes the feed infrastructure. Open the panel, or I will have the fire department pry it open." I watched from my doorway as the tables turned with the slow, crushing weight of karma. They went into Gavin's building. They didn't come out for 4 hours. When they did, they weren't holding clipboards. They were holding rolls of red tape. I stood there and watched as the fire marshal slapped a "Notice of Violation" sticker on the front glass doors of the Holloway Tower, then another on the retail strip, then another on the parking garage entrance. "What are you doing?" Gavin was screaming. "Following them out." "You can't do this. I have tenants. I have a law firm on the 4th floor." "You have a daisy-chained electrical system from 1975, Vance barked, losing his patience. "You have blocked fire exits in the retail basement. Your sprinkler system has no water pressure. I am not shutting you down yet, but I am issuing a 48-hour cure notice. Fix the critical life safety violations, or I pull the occupancy permit for the entire tower." Renee came running out of the lobby, her phone pressed to her ear. She looked frantic. "Daddy," she yelled. "The partners at Henderson Associates are on the line. The fire alarm testing interrupted their deposition. They are saying if the building is red-tagged, they are triggering the lease break clause. They are talking about moving out." "Fix it," Gavin roared at her, sweating profusely. "Call the electricians. Call everyone." "We can't fix 40 years of neglect in 48 hours, Renee screamed back, her composure finally shattering. "You said you managed this place. You said it was up to code. It was fine until they showed up." Gavin gestured wildly at the inspectors. I leaned against my doorframe, taking a sip of water. Gavin had called down the thunder to drown me, but he had forgotten that he was the one living in a house made of dry wood. The afternoon descended into chaos for the Holloway family. Electrician vans filled the lot my lot. Technically, since they were parked on the disputed easement, but I let it slide. I wanted them to spend money. I wanted them to bleed cash trying to patch the sinking ship. But as night fell, the chaos quieted, leaving a tense, vibrating silence over the block. I didn't sleep. I sat in the command chair, watching the thermal cameras. Gavin was desperate. He had tried legal bulldozing. He had tried bureaucratic swatting. Both had failed. When a man like Gavin runs out of legal options, and when he is facing financial ruin, he stops thinking about the law. He starts thinking about direct action. At 2:15 in the morning, the proximity alarm on the south fence chirped. I pulled up the feed. The camera, equipped with low-light night vision, showed a figure moving through the shadows near the transformer box. This wasn't the main city transformer. It was the secondary junction that fed my specific line, the one I had paid to have installed underground, but which surfaced briefly near the property line. The figure was wearing a dark hoodie and carrying a heavy duffel bag. I watched as he knelt by the conduit. He pulled something out of the bag. It was a reciprocating saw. He was going to cut the main power feed. He didn't know about my backup generators, or he didn't care. He just wanted to kill the lights. He wanted to cause the outage that would cost me $200,000 an hour. I reached for the phone to call the police, but then I zoomed in on the figure. He turned slightly to check behind him. The infrared light caught his face. It wasn't Gavin. Gavin was too old, too cowardly for manual labor in the dark. It was Trent, my second cousin, the one who had always followed Gavin around like a lost puppy, the one who worked as the facilities manager for the block but mostly just smoked cigarettes by the loading dock. Trent, who blamed me for the fact that the family trust hadn't paid out a bonus in 2 years. He raised the saw. I could have turned on the floodlights. I could have spoken over the PA system. I could have scared him off. But if I scared him off, he would come back. And next time, he might bring fire. I needed this to end. I needed a criminal record. I dialed 911. "This is Aurora Mitchell at the West Warehouse. I have a trespasser currently attempting to sabotage the high-voltage electrical grid. He is armed with power tools. I am afraid he is going to cause an explosion." I didn't say, "my cousin." I said, "trespasser." I watched on the screen. Trent was struggling with the casing of the conduit. He was sweating. Nervous. The saw blade screeched against the metal, a sound that must have seemed deafening in the quiet night. But the office tower blocked the noise from the street. 3 minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled into the lot. Lights off. They were efficient. I watched as the officers approached Trent from behind. He was so focused on his vandalism that he didn't hear them until the flashlight beam hit him. Police dropped the saw. Trent jumped. He dropped the saw. It clattered onto the concrete. Hands in the air. I watched my cousin fall to his knees. I watched them cuff him. I watched him crying, shouting something about doing it for the family, shouting that she deserves it. I saved the video file. I backed it up to 3 different servers. The next morning, the mood at the Holloway block was funereal. The red tags were still on the doors, and now one of their own was sitting in a county jail cell, charged with attempted arson, vandalism of utility infrastructure, and criminal trespass. Inspector Rourke was back. He stood in my office, the real office inside the clean zone, not the fake one I kept near the front. He watched the video footage I had handed him. He was silent for a long time. "This is escalating," Rourke said, looking at me. "Your uncle or his lackeys, they aren't just playing dirty anymore, cutting a high-voltage line. He could have killed himself. He could have started a fire that took out the whole block." "Trent isn't smart," I said. "He was following orders." "Can you prove Gavin ordered it?" "Not yet," I admitted. "Trent will likely take the fall. He is loyal to a fault." Rourke shook his head. "Ms. Mitchell, I have seen these disputes before. They start with property lines and end with bodies. You need to be careful. Someone is making this criminal. They are desperate enough to risk felony charges. I am safe inside," I said. "Are you—" Rourke pointed to the screen. "That conduit he tried to cut. It is outside your perimeter. You can fortify the inside all you want, but you rely on the city for power and water. If they can't get in, they will try to starve you out." Rourke left, promising to add the police report to the growing file of the city's investigation into the Holloway management. I sat alone in the humming silence of the server room. I felt a strange hollowness. Seeing Trent in handcuffs hadn't felt like a victory. It felt like a tragedy. They were destroying themselves to get to me. My secure phone rang. It wasn't a text this time. It was a voice call. The number was blocked. I hesitated. I had never answered a voice call on this line. It was for emergency texts only. I picked it up. "Mitchell." The voice on the other end was digitally altered, deep and metallic, but the menace was human enough. "You survived the inspectors," the voice said, "and you survived the amateur with the saw." I didn't speak. I triggered the trace program on my laptop, though I knew it would likely bounce off a dozen proxies. "But you are missing the point, Ms. Mitchell," the voice continued. "We don't care about the land. We don't care about your family squabbles. We care about the drive in Rack 4, Slot B." My heart stopped. Rack 4. Slot B. That was the Marrowline encrypted archive. The data I wasn't supposed to look at. The data was just cold storage. "You are drawing too much attention," the voice said. "Police, inspectors, lawyers. You are shining a spotlight on a dark room. We don't like spotlights." "Who is this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the cold sweat on my spine. "You have 24 hours to disengage," the voice said. "Drop the lawsuit against your uncle. Let him sell the land. Let the demolition proceed. We will extract the drive before the walls fall, but the building must go. And if I don't, you are safe inside your box, Aurora," the voice said. "But you have to come out sometime. You shouldn't keep that thing in the warehouse. It is radioactive, and radiation burns everyone close to it." The line went dead. I stared at the phone. Gavin wasn't the enemy. Gavin was a puppet. He was being pushed to sell, pushed to demolish, because the people buying the land needed to destroy something inside my facility. They didn't want the data preserved. They wanted it buried under rubble, labeled as an accident during demolition. I looked at Rack 4. It sat there, blinking innocently with a steady blue light. I had been fighting to save my building. Now I realized I was sitting on top of a smoking gun that someone was willing to kill to destroy. I wasn't just a landlord anymore. I was a witness. And in their eyes, witnesses were just another form of structural blight. Friday morning brought a quietude that felt less like peace and more like the stillness before a funeral. The chaos of the police cruisers and the flashing lights from the night before had vanished, leaving behind a heavy gray atmosphere that clung to the damp pavement of the Holloway block. Trent was still in county lockup, awaiting arraignment. The power lines were being repaired by a legitimate city crew, who worked in hushed tones, eyeing the rusted hulk of my warehouse with newfound respect, or perhaps fear. I was not at the warehouse. I was sitting in the high-backed leather chair of Mr. Henderson's office. Mr. Henderson was 80 years old, a man who seemed to be made of the same parchment and mahogany that filled his workspace. He had been my grandmother's attorney for 40 years. He had drafted the will. He had overseen the severance of my parcel, and now he sat across from me, his gnarled hands resting on a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. "She told me to wait," Henderson said, his voice rasping like dry leaves. "She was very specific about the conditions. Aurora," she said, "Arthur, you keep this in the vault. You keep it safe, and you only give it to her if the family tries to destroy the building." He pushed the envelope across the desk. "She didn't say, if they try to sell it. She didn't say, if they are rude to her. She said, specifically, if they try to destroy the physical structure. I saw the news report about the bulldozer on Monday, and I heard about the incident with your cousin last night. The condition has been met." I stared at the envelope. My name was written on it in handwriting that I hadn't seen in 5 years. It was shaky, written when the Parkinson's was beginning to steal her motor control, but the loops of the A were still defiant and large. I picked it up. The wax cracked with a sound that felt incredibly loud in the silence of the room. Inside were 3 pages of dense, handwritten text and a legal addendum typed on formal stationery. I began to read. "My dearest Aurora, if you are reading this, then I was right. I am sorry that I was right. I wanted to believe that Gavin would be satisfied with the empire I built for him. I wanted to believe that he would look at your little corner of the world and let it be. But Gavin is a man who cannot stand to see a reflection that isn't his own. He builds mirrors, not homes. They have likely called you a failure by now. They have likely mocked your silence and your rusty walls. Do not listen to them. They make noise because they are empty. You are silent because you are full, but there is something you need to know, something I was too cowardly to fix while I was alive. You see, Gavin walks around that block like a king, claiming he built it, claiming he manages it by divine right, but he is a usurper." I paused, my breath catching in my throat. I looked up at Henderson. He nodded solemnly, urging me to continue. 6 months before I died, when I was in the hospital and confused by the medication, Gavin brought papers to my bedside. He told me they were routine tax extensions. They were not. They were amendments to the family trust bylaws. He transferred the voting rights of the entire board to himself. He removed the oversight clauses. He stole the governance of the Holloway block from the rest of the family while I was too weak to hold a pen properly. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. It wasn't just arrogance, it was theft. He had stolen the birthright of his siblings, of Dylan, of Renee. He had turned a democracy into a dictatorship. I tried to reverse it later, but the lawyers said it would cause a scandal that would destroy the property value. I was dying. Aurora, I didn't have the fight left in me. So, I wrote this instead. I turned to the legal addendum. It was a codicil to the trust, signed and notarized by Henderson, dated 3 days before her death. It is hereby established that the authority of the managing director, Gavin Holloway, is conditional upon the preservation of the original estate boundaries, specifically the independent parcel designated as the West Warehouse. Should the managing director attempt to demolish, damage, or significantly alter the West Warehouse without the express written consent of the owner, or should he be found complicit in any act that endangers the structural integrity of said parcel, his tenure as managing director is immediately terminated for cause malicious destruction of estate assets. Upon such termination, all voting rights and management authority shall revert immediately to a democratic vote of the remaining beneficiaries. I lowered the paper. It was a dead man's switch. She knew he would come for me, and she had turned my warehouse into the keystone of his entire existence. If he struck it, he didn't just break a wall, he broke his own throne. There is more, Henderson said softly. Read the postscript. I turned back to the handwritten letter. P.S. Be careful of a company called Marrowline. They came to me 10 years ago. Men in expensive suits with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They wanted to buy the block then. I threw them out. They didn't want to develop it. Aurora. They wanted to bury something. I don't know what. And I don't want to know. But money that comes that usually smells of blood. If Gavin is dealing with them, he is dancing with the devil. I folded the letter. The room seemed to tilt slightly. The connection was complete. Marrowline wasn't new. They had been circling for a decade, and my grandmother had sensed the rot in them long before I found a server rack. Thank you, Arthur, I said, standing up. What are you going to do? He asked. I am going to go to a meeting, I said, sliding the envelope into my bag. And I am going to finish this. The boardroom at the Holloway Tower was different this time. There was no coffee. There were no blueprints. The air conditioning was off because the building was still technically under a partial repair order, making the room stuffy and hot. Gavin sat at the end of the table. He looked 10 years older than he had on Monday. His skin was gray, his eyes bloodshot, the arrest of his nephew, the stop work orders, the looming lawsuit, it had all crashed down on him. Renee was sitting with her arms crossed, staring out the window at the parking lot where her car was parked on my land. Dylan was looking at his hands. When I walked in, nobody spoke. They expected me to gloat. They expected me to demand the $1.5 million. I didn't sit down. I walked to the center of the room and placed the letter on the table. Grandma left a letter, I said. For today. Gavin looked at the envelope. He recognized the handwriting immediately. I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes, not the fear of the law, but the fear of a child caught by a parent. She is dead, Gavin muttered. What difference does it make? Read it, I said, out loud. I will not, he spat. Then I will, Renee said. She reached out and took the letter. Her hands were trembling. She began to read. As she read the words about Gavin's mirror, about his vanity, the room grew smaller, but when she reached the part about the hospital, about the manipulated papers, her voice broke. He told me they were tax extensions. Renee read, tears spilling onto her cheeks. She looked up at her father. Daddy, is that true? You told us Grandma wanted you to take over. You said she begged you to lead us. Gavin didn't answer. He stared at the mahogany table. His jaw clenched so tight, I thought his teeth would shatter. You stole it, Dylan whispered. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. We have been scraping by for 5 years, listening to you lecture us about family sacrifice, and you stole the control while she was on her deathbed. I did what had to be done. Gavin slammed his fist on the table, but there was no power in it. She was old. She was going to leave it to a committee. We would have been deadlocked. I saved this block. You didn't save it, I said calmly. You mortgaged it to your ego, and now you are trying to sell it to criminals to cover your tracks. I pointed to the legal document lying next to the letter. The codicil is clear. Gavin. By sending the bulldozers on Monday, and by your complicity in Trent's vandalism last night, you triggered the removal clause. You are no longer the managing director. You are fired. You can't fire me, Gavin screamed, standing up. I am the Holloway block. Not anymore, Dylan said. He picked up the legal document and read it. Then he looked at Renee. I move for a vote of no confidence. Immediate removal of Gavin Holloway from all management duties. All in favor. Aye, Dylan said firmly. Renee looked at her father. She looked at the man who had bullied her, lied to her, and nearly led them all into financial ruin. She wiped her face. Aye, Renee whispered. And as the holder of the independent parcel which triggered the clause, I added, I cast the deciding vote. The motion carries. Gavin stood there, panting. He looked around the room, waiting for a lawyer to jump out, waiting for a loophole. But there were no loopholes in Grandma's love, and there were certainly none in her wrath. He slumped back into his chair. He looked small. He looked like a man who had been running a race for 40 years only to realize he was running in the wrong direction. "You don't understand," Gavin whispered. His voice was hollow. "Marrowline, they aren't just developers. You can't just say no to them. I tried to stall them. I tried to make the deal work. If we don't sell, if we don't give them the land." He looked up at me, and for the first time, I didn't see hatred. I saw terror. "They will burn it down, Aurora," he said. "They told me, if I couldn't clear the lot, they would clear it for me." "I know," I said. "Grandma warned me about them in the letter." I tapped the postscript. "She refused them 10 years ago," I told the room. "She said they were dirty. She protected this block from them, and you invited them in for dinner." Renee looked at the letter again. "She knew. She knew about Marrowline. She knew everything," I said. "She knew that some money costs too much." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of conflict. It was the silence of a vacuum. The power structure of the family had evaporated in 5 minutes, replaced by the crushing reality of what Gavin had unleashed. I looked at my cousins. Dylan looked liberated, but frightened. Renee looked heartbroken. They weren't my enemies anymore. They were just collateral damage. "I am dropping the lawsuit for the easement," I said quietly. "I am not going to charge the family $1.5 million, and I am not going to cut the fiber line." Dylan looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because Grandma didn't leave me the warehouse to destroy the family," I said. "She left it to me to save it, and right now, we have a bigger problem than parking spaces." I turned to leave. I had what I wanted. I had my vindication. I had the truth. But as I walked toward the door, I felt the weight of Gavin's words. "They will burn it down." The phone call from the night before echoed in my head. "You shouldn't keep that thing in the warehouse." I stopped at the door and looked back at Gavin. He was holding his head in his hands. "Gavin," I said. He looked up. "The threat?" I asked. "The anonymous tip about the chemicals, the push to demolish, was that all you—" He shook his head slowly. "I filed the permit, I hired the crew, but the tip, the pressure on the city inspector, the call to the fire marshal that wasn't me, I don't have that kind of pull at City Hall." "I know," I said. I walked out. The realization hit me as I stepped into the elevator. The anonymous voice on the phone. The hacking of the city database that Inspector Rourke had found. The speed of the demolition permit. It wasn't Gavin. It had never really been Gavin. He was just the greedy, useful idiot that Marrowline had used to open the door. I pulled out my phone. I had a missed message from the secure line. "Subject perimeter breach attempted." Time: 10:45 a.m. Status failed. They had tried to get in while I was at the meeting. Grandma's letter had given me the weapon to defeat my family, but it had also given me the final clue to the real war. Marrowline wasn't interested in a mixed-use high-rise. You don't hack city servers for condos. You don't threaten to burn down a block for retail space. They were coming for the drive, and now that Gavin was out of the way, they had no one left to hide behind. The buffer was gone. I walked out to my car. The warehouse stood across the lot, silent and ugly and defiant. It had survived my family's neglect. It had survived Gavin's greed. But now, it was about to face the thing that had been hunting it for 10 years. I wasn't just fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting the ghost that Grandma had refused to let in the door. The hearing on Monday morning was not held in a small, dusty back room. Because of the public interest generated by the police activity and the sheer scale of the alleged zoning fraud. The city council moved the proceedings to the main municipal chamber. It was a room of polished oak and high ceilings, designed to make citizens feel small and the law feel large. But what surprised me most wasn't the venue. It was the noise. Reporters were there, not just the local Ridgeport Gazette, but a crew from the state capitol news station. The story of a zombie warehouse that turned out to be a high-tech fortress had leaked, likely thanks to the gossip network of the police officers who arrested Trent. The headline, "Family Feud or Corporate Conspiracy," was already trending on local social media. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Marcus. On the other side sat Gavin. looking shrunken in his suit, flanked by his lawyer, Sterling. But there was a third table today. At this table sat two men in charcoal gray suits, who looked like they had been manufactured in a boardroom rather than born. They were the legal counsel for Marrowline Development, the presiding officer, a stern woman named Commissioner Holloway, no relation, thankfully banged her gavel. The sound cut through the murmur of the press gallery like a gunshot. "We are here to review the emergency injunction regarding the demolition permit for Parcel 4B, Commissioner Holloway announced, "and to address the counterclaims of fraudulent filing and endangerment of public safety. Let the record show that the stop work order remains in effect." She looked over her glasses at Gavin. "Mr. Holloway, your team filed an affidavit stating the structure was, and I quote, a structurally unsound hazard inhabited by vermin. Do you stand by this assessment?" Gavin opened his mouth, but Sterling put a hand on his arm. "My client relied on third-party reports. Commissioner, if those reports were in error—" "They were not in error," I said, standing up. "They were lies." "Ms. Mitchell, sit down," the commissioner said, though her tone was not unkind. "We will hear from the city inspector first. Mr. Rourke, please approach." Miles Rourke walked to the podium. He looked uncomfortable in a tie, but his face was set in granite. He placed his tablet on the stand and looked directly at the commissioner. "I conducted a site visit on Monday morning at 800 hours, Rourke began, his voice amplified by the microphone. "I arrived to find heavy demolition machinery positioned to breach the western wall. I halted the operation based on a utility flag." "And what did you find inside?" "Inspector," the commissioner asked. "I expected to find a derelict shell," Rourke said. He swiped his tablet, casting an image onto the large screens mounted on the walls. The press gallery gasped. The screen showed the interior of my facility, the gleaming white corridors, the rows of server racks, the biometric scanners, the nitrogen cooling tanks. "This is not a shed," Rourke stated flatly. "This is a Tier 4 data storage facility operating at military-grade specifications. The structural integrity is superior to this courthouse. The air quality is cleaner than a hospital. There were no rats. There was no rot. There was a fully operational, high-security business managing assets I estimate to be in the millions." He paused, then turned to look at Gavin. "In my 15 years as an inspector," Rourke continued, "I have never seen a grosser misrepresentation of a property on a permit application. To call this building blight is not an exaggeration. It is a fabrication designed to bypass safety protocols. If those bulldozers had struck the coolant tanks, we would have had a chemical spill requiring a hazmat evacuation of 3 city blocks." The reporters were typing furiously. Gavin sank lower in his chair. "Thank you, Inspector," the commissioner said. Her eyes were cold as she turned to the Marrowline table. "Now, I would like to understand why a national development firm is named in a demolition order for a local property." One of the charcoal suits stood up. He was smooth, practiced. He buttoned his jacket with a single, fluid motion. "Commissioner, my name is Arthur Kincaid, representing Marrowline Development. We are as shocked as you are by these revelations." I watched him closely. He was good. He was distancing himself before the mud even started flying. "We entered into a preliminary purchase agreement with Mr. Holloway based on his representations," Kincaid said, his voice dripping with reasonable concern. "We were told he possessed full title and management control of the entire block. We were assured, in writing, that the western parcel was a derelict storage unit included in the master deed." Kincaid pulled a document from his briefcase. "Mr. Holloway provided us with a guarantee of vacancy. We had no idea the parcel was independently owned, nor that it contained a legitimate business. Had we known, we never would have proceeded." It was a masterclass in deflection. They were throwing Gavin to the wolves to save their own reputation. "So you are saying," the commissioner asked, "that the pressure to demolish came solely from Mr. Holloway?" "Absolutely," Kincaid said. "We simply wanted a clear title. How he achieved that was his responsibility." "Objection," Marcus said. standing up. That is factually incorrect. Marcus walked to the podium. He didn't look like a high-priced corporate shark. He looked like a man who did his homework. Commissioner, if I may direct your attention to Exhibit C, Marcus said. A new image appeared on the screens. It was the email chain I had recovered from the contractor's error. The header information was blown up for everyone to see. This is an email sent from the Director of Acquisitions at Marrowline to Gavin Holloway, Marcus explained. It is dated 10 days ago. Please read the highlighted text. The text was stark and damning. The deal closes. If the warehouse is cleared, we do not want the structure standing at closing. Handle the tenant, or we walk. Handle the tenant, Marcus repeated. Not negotiate with the tenant, not buy out the tenant. Clear the warehouse. This wasn't a passive request. Commissioner, this was a directive. Marrowline knew there was a structure. They made its destruction a condition of the $58 million payout. Kincaid's smooth expression faltered for a fraction of a second. And, Marcus added, we have metadata from the digital signature on the draft contract. It shows that Marrowline's legal team accessed the file 17 times. One of those access logs is timestamped directly after the demolition permit was filed. They were monitoring the progress of the destruction in real time. The room buzzed. The narrative was shifting. This wasn't just a greedy uncle. This was a corporate hit job. Mr. Holloway, the commissioner said, turning back to Gavin. Is this true? Did Marrowline instruct you to demolish the building to secure the funding? Gavin looked at Kincaid. He saw the cold, dead stare of the corporate lawyer who was ready to bury him. He looked at me. He saw the niece he had underestimated. Then he looked at Dylan, who was sitting in the front row of the gallery, holding a stack of ledgers. Gavin's voice cracked. I needed the money. Dylan stood up. He didn't ask for permission. He walked through the gate and placed the ledgers on the plaintiff's table. Commissioner, Dylan said, his voice trembling but loud enough to be heard. I am the accountant for the Holloway Trust. These are the books. Mr. Holloway, you are not a witness, the commissioner warned. I am a witness to the motive, Dylan said. My uncle has been hiding the insolvency of the trust for 2 years. We are 3 months away from bankruptcy. The renovations on the East Wing were over budget by $2 million. He didn't just want to sell. He had to sell. Dylan pointed at Gavin. He told me he was saving the family, but he was going to sell the land out from under Aurora to do it. He knew he didn't own it. He just hoped that if he knocked the building down fast enough, nobody would check the survey lines until the check cleared. Renee, sitting next to Dylan, looked like she was going to be sick. The reporters were turning their cameras on her now. The golden girl of the real estate family was now the sister of a whistleblower and the daughter of a fraud. Ms. Holloway, a reporter shouted from the back. Did you know about the insolvency? Renee stood up. She looked at Gavin. She saw a man who had lied to her every day for 2 years. No, Renee said, her voice shaking. I didn't know. She stepped away from the defense table. She walked over and stood next to Dylan. It was a small movement, 5 feet of carpet, but it was a canyon. She had chosen. She was saving herself. Yes, but she was also abandoning the sinking ship that was Gavin Holloway. Gavin was alone. This is a conspiracy, Gavin whispered, but nobody was listening. Mr. Holloway, the commissioner said, her voice icy. Based on the testimony of the inspector, the evidence of the emails, and the financial motive presented, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal fraud charges. I am also levying a fine of $50,000 against the Holloway Trust for filing false permits. She turned to Kincaid. And Marrowline Development will be receiving a subpoena regarding their role in soliciting illegal demolition. Kincaid didn't flush. He simply gathered his papers. We will cooperate fully. Commissioner, we were misled. You were not misled, I said. The room went quiet. I hadn't raised my voice. I spoke with the calm, flat affect of someone discussing the weather. You didn't want the land, I said to Kincaid. You have bought 3 other blocks in this city, and left the old structures standing for months. You preserve facades. You integrate history. But for my warehouse, you demanded immediate clearance. I walked toward the rail. You don't care about the parking, I said. You don't care about the square footage. You wanted to erase me. Ms. Mitchell, Kincaid said, smiling tightly. You are being dramatic. It is a standard closing condition. It is a sanitize order, I corrected. You knew what was inside, or rather, you knew what specific drive was sitting in my server rack, and you couldn't afford for it to survive a sale. Commissioner, Kincaid said, looking bored. This is conspiracy theory territory. We are a real estate firm. Are you? I asked. I turned to the commissioner. Your Honor, yesterday my facility received a threatening phone call. The caller demanded I drop this lawsuit and allow the demolition. They threatened to burn the building down if I didn't comply. They mentioned specific details about the data inside my facility, details that are not public record. The commissioner frowned. A threat? Did you report this to the police? I reported it to my own security team. I said, we traced the call. And the number was a burner, I admitted. Untraceable by standard means. Kincaid let out a short, mocking laugh. So, a phantom call. Very convenient. However, I continued, ignoring him. The voice print I ran through an audio analysis algorithm. I stripped the modulation. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket. I didn't recognize the voice, I said. But the background noise. The algorithm picked up a distinct frequency in the background, a specific hum. It is the sound of the HVAC system used in only one building in this city. I pointed at Kincaid. It is the sound of the air conditioning in the Marrowline executive offices on 4th Street. I said, I know, because I consulted on the installation of that system 5 years ago. The silence in the room was absolute. That is absurd, Kincaid said. But for the first time, he shifted his weight. He stopped smiling. Commissioner, I said, I am submitting the audio file and the spectral analysis into evidence. The call came from inside their building. They tried to intimidate a witness. They tried to coerce the destruction of evidence. The commissioner looked at the USB drive in my hand like it was a weapon. Mr. Kincaid, she said slowly, if this evidence links your firm to witness intimidation, it is a fabrication, Kincaid snapped, losing his cool. She is a tech wizard. She could have faked it. Then let the forensics team analyze it, I said. I looked at Gavin. He was staring at me, his mouth open. He realized now that he wasn't the villain. He was just the pawn. The real monster was the man in the charcoal suit standing next to him. You see, Uncle Gavin, I said softly, they didn't want your land. They wanted to kill my business, and they used you to pull the trigger. The reporters were shouting questions now. The flashbulbs were blinding. Order. The commissioner banged her gavel. Order. She looked at me. Ms. Mitchell, submit the drive. This hearing is recessed until 2 o'clock. I want the police to take custody of this evidence immediately. She pointed her gavel at Kincaid. And you, counselor, are not to leave this building. Kincaid glared at me. It wasn't a corporate glare anymore. It was a look of pure, unadulterated malice. I turned to Marcus. We need to go. Why? Marcus whispered, packing his briefcase frantically. You just won. No, I said, watching Kincaid tap something on his phone under the table. I just backed them into a corner. Legal threats are one thing, but I just proved they are criminal. They aren't going to wait for the next hearing. I looked at my phone. A notification popped up from my security system. Alert power grid failure. Main supply cut. Alert backup generators engaged. Alert perimeter sensors offline in Sector 4. They just cut the power, I told Marcus. The real power, not just the switch. What does that mean? It means, I said, grabbing my bag, that while Kincaid was distracting us here, someone else went to the warehouse. They aren't trying to buy it anymore. They are going to try to take it by force. I looked at Dylan and Renee. They were staring at me, lost in the wreckage of their family legacy. If you want to save what is left of this family, I told them, stay here. Keep the cameras on Gavin. Keep him safe. "Where are you going?" Dylan asked. "I have to go home," I said. "I have a breach." I ran out of the courtroom, pushing past the reporters. The legal battle was a diversion. The courtroom was a stage. The real fight was happening right now, in the dark, humming heart of my warehouse, where the secrets were stored, and I was the only one with the key. The breach at the warehouse did not end in an explosion. It ended with the silent, digital snap of a trap closing. When I arrived back at my facility on Monday afternoon, the police were already putting a man in the back of a cruiser. He was not a family member. He was a private contractor carrying an electromagnetic pulse device, a tool designed to wipe hard drives without leaving a physical trace. But he had made a mistake. He had cut the power, assuming the cameras would die. He did not know about the independent battery backups concealed in the fence posts. I had his face. I had his license plate, and crucially, I had the text message on his seized phone that read, "Asset wipe initiated. Kincaid authorized." By Tuesday morning, the chaos of the courtroom had been replaced by the sterile, fluorescent quiet of the district attorney's conference room. The screaming match was over. Now, it was time for the autopsy of the Holloway family legacy. I sat at the long table, flanked by Marcus and Inspector Rourke. On the other side sat the remnants of the opposition. Kincaid, the Marrowline lawyer, looked significantly less polished than he had the day before. His tie was loosened, and he was sweating. Gavin sat at the far end, isolated, staring at the grain of the wood table as if it contained the script of where his life had gone wrong. I slid a heavy black hard drive across the table. It stopped perfectly in front of the district attorney. "This drive contains the complete security logs from the last 30 days, I said. My voice was calm, the adrenaline of the chase replaced by the cold satisfaction of the kill. "It includes video of my cousin Trent attempting to saw through the conduit. It includes the audio spectral analysis of the threatening call from Marrowline's office, and it includes the footage from yesterday afternoon showing Marrowline's contractor attempting to destroy evidence." The DA, a sharp-eyed woman who had seen enough property disputes to know when a developer was lying, looked at Kincaid. "We have the contractor in custody, Mr. Kincaid," she said. "He is cutting a deal. He says you hired him to sanitize the site before the city could inspect the drives." Kincaid crumbled. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a structural failure of his legal defense. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "We did not order violence," Kincaid said, his voice tight. "We were under a deadline. The investors were getting cold feet. We told Mr. Holloway that if the site wasn't cleared by Wednesday, the funding would be pulled. We strongly encouraged him to use the municipal blight code to expedite the process." "You solicited fraud," Marcus corrected. "We applied pressure," Kincaid admitted. "Mr. Holloway assured us he could handle the city. We didn't know he was going to forge safety reports." Gavin looked up then. His eyes were hollow. "You told me to do it. You sent me the template for the blight application. You told me it was standard industry practice." "And you signed it," Kincaid snapped back. "Enough," the DA interrupted. She turned to me. "Ms. Mitchell, the city is prepared to issue a permanent injunction against any demolition activity on Parcel 4B. Furthermore, we are opening a criminal investigation into Marrowline development for witness intimidation and attempted destruction of evidence." She looked at Gavin. "As for the Holloway Trust, given your cooperation in exposing Marrowline's pressure tactics, we are willing to discuss a plea regarding the fraudulent permits, but the civil penalties will be severe." The legal war was over. Now came the terms of surrender. I turned to my family, or what was left of it. "I have drafted a new easement agreement," I said, sliding a document toward Renee. "It grants the Holloway block the right to use my land for the driveway and the utility lines. The cost is $250,000 a year, fixed for 10 years. Renee looked at the paper. She looked at the number. It was fair. It was exactly what I had demanded before, minus the punitive back pay. "And the $1.5 million, she asked quietly. "Waived," I said. "Consider it a donation to the cleanup fund. You are going to need it to pay the city fines." Renee nodded. She picked up the pen. Her hand was steady. She signed her name on the line that said, Managing Director. Gavin flinched when he saw her sign. He had lost his title in the boardroom vote, but seeing it on paper made it real. He was no longer the king of the block. He was just a tenant in a building he used to rule. There is one more condition, I said. I looked at Gavin. You are done, I said to him. Not just as director, you are done with me. You do not step foot on my parcel. You do not speak to my staff. You do not even look at my fence. If you violate this restraining order, I will trigger the penalty clause in the easement, and I will bankrupt this block in 24 hours. Gavin didn't argue. He didn't bluster. He simply nodded, a slow, defeated motion. The arrogance had been bulldozed, leaving only a tired old man who had gambled his family on a lie and lost. We accept, Renee said. The meeting adjourned. Kincaid was escorted out by police officers to give a formal statement. Gavin left alone, walking out the door without looking back, a ghost fading into the hallway. I stayed behind to gather my files. Dylan and Renee lingered. Dylan walked over to me. He looked exhausted, but for the first time in years, he didn't look sweaty or nervous. He looked clear. Aurora, he said. I stopped packing my bag. I didn't smile. I waited. I went through the books again last night, Dylan said. Gavin was skimming from the maintenance fund to pay the interest on the loans. We would have lost the whole block in 6 months if you hadn't stopped the sale. Marrowline was going to strip the assets and liquidate us. He took a breath. You didn't just save your warehouse. You saved the legacy. I am sorry I didn't see it. I am sorry I thought you were the failure. It was a real apology. There was no but, no however, no request for a loan attached to the end of it. Thank you, Dylan, I said. Renee stepped forward. She looked at me with a strange expression respect, mixed with a healthy dose of fear. We are going to rebrand, Renee said. Transparent management. No more secrets. We are going to fix the code violations. It will take time. But we can do it, she hesitated. We could use a consultant. Someone who understands infrastructure. If you ever wanted to... No, I cut her off. I zipped up my bag. I am not your consultant, Renee, and I am not your partner. I am your neighbor. I am the independent parcel on the edge of your map. We can be civil. We can be family at Thanksgiving, but business is business. I slung my bag over my shoulder. Don't try to integrate me. Don't try to fix me. Just respect the fence line, and we will get along fine. Renee nodded. She understood. I didn't want their love, and I didn't need their validation. I just needed them to understand that I was not something to be paved over. I walked out of the city hall and into the bright sunlight. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, the perfume of the city. I drove back to the warehouse. The stop work order was still taped to the door, but now it was joined by a new sign, posted by the City Protected Infrastructure, Critical Facility. I unlocked the steel door and stepped inside. The transition was immediate. The noise of the world vanished, replaced by the steady, rhythmic hum of the cooling fans and the soft beep of the server stacks. The air was cool and clean. The lights blinked in their reassuring patterns, green and blue, a constellation of data that was worth more than all the bricks and mortar outside. I walked down the white corridor. I checked the monitors. The breach was sealed. The data was secure. The client in the sub-basement had sent a single message. Contract renewed. Payment transferred. I stood in the center of my fortress. Outside, the corrugated metal was still rusted. The weeds still grew through the cracks in the concrete. To the passing cars, it still looked like a blight, a failure, a forgotten piece of junk. But I knew better. The door opened behind me. It was Inspector Miles Rourke. He had come to do a final sign-off on the safety protocols. He stood in the doorway, looking at the rows of servers, then back at me. You know, Rourke said, tapping his tablet, I have closed 1,000 cases in this city. Usually, they end with a fine or a demolition. It is rare that I get to save something. He walked over to the wall and placed a new certification sticker on the panel. It was a gold seal. Passed. I stopped this case, Rourke said. looking me in the eye. Because I found the real operating file, the one people try to bury. It is easy to knock down a building, Ms. Mitchell. It is easy to knock down a person, but it is very hard to knock down the truth once it is running on backup power. He smiled, a tired, genuine smile. You keep it running, Aurora. I intend to, I said. Rourke left, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind him, the lock engaged with a solid thud. I was alone. The bulldozers had gone, the lawyers had gone, the family had retreated to their tower to lick their wounds. I looked at the screen. The system status read 100% operational. They had brought heavy machinery to break me. They had brought lies and lawsuits and threats. But they had forgotten the most important rule of construction before you tear something down. You better be damn sure you know what is holding it up. They never touched the warehouse. The metal never bent. The glass never broke. But the truth. The truth had hit them squarely in the chest, and it didn't need a permit, and it certainly didn't need a bulldozer. Thank you so much for listening to this story of revenge and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, at work, or relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed seeing Aurora protect her empire, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.